college horror stories. Tonight, we delve into the chilling tales from college dormitories that will leave you questioning the safety of your own room. A black entity seems to haunt a girl living on her own for the first time, but it doesn't stay with the room. It follows the people who know its story. But first, a story about sounds in the night and a roommate gone missing. A spring break to die for. It was quiet on campus over spring break. Janice and Ivy were roommates, and since neither could afford to go home over the break, they kept each other company in the dorm. One night, the girls were watching TV in the room. Ivy said she was hungry, so she went downstairs to get something to eat. "Take your key," Janice said. "Why? There's nobody here," Ivy said. "I'm going to lock the door, just in case. Please, I'm so comfy here. I don't want to get up twice," Janice said. "Nah, just get up twice, you bum. Or don't lock the door for once. I'm not taking the key," Ivy said. Ivy left. Janice moaned and got up to lock the door behind her. Ivy didn't come back for a long time, but Janice just figured she had found someone else to talk to for a while. Janice got tired and got ready for bed. She was getting frustrated that she would have to get up to let Ivy in when it was so late. Just when she was about to lay down, she heard a thumping and sliding noise and a vigorous scratching at her door. Janice was terrified and glad the door was locked. Janice walked up to the door to listen, but didn't unlock it. "Ivy?" There was no answer, but the scratching continued on the lower part of the door. "Ivy, this is not cool." There was no answer, but the scratching continued for a few more minutes and then stopped. "Ivy?" There was still no answer. Janice figured it was a prank. But then, why didn't Ivy come in laughing? Janice puzzled over this, feeling confused and afraid. She lay in bed staring at the door for a long time. If Ivy really wanted to come back, she could just knock and say something. Eventually, Janice fell asleep. The next morning, Janice woke at dawn with a jolt and got up. She slowly opened the door and screamed in terror, for there, in front of the door, was the dead body of her roommate, an axe in her head, and her fingers torn and bloody from scratching at the door. The tall, black entity. I was roommates with Jen for 2 years, and when I asked her about why she always had a holy something or other with her at all times, a necklace, a medallion in her pocket, a piece of cloth in her purse, she wouldn't tell me. Finally, she alluded to a traumatic past and fear of ghosts. I laughed at her kindly and said they aren't real. When our senior year was almost done, I needed a project for a journalism class, and I begged her to tell me her story. She reluctantly did. This is the story that Jen told me. It started in 2015, her second year living in a dorm. The first year didn't go so well with a crazy roommate, so Jen, a sophomore at the University of Miami, applied to live alone. She got into single unit 21B at Mahoney. It was small, but the room at the end of the third-floor hallway felt cozy enough to be a sanctuary. The walls had some chunks taken out of them. There was a mysterious crack on the inside of the front door, and even 3 strange, long indentations in the wall of the bathroom. They looked for all the world like old claw marks that had been painted over. When Jen asked about the damages, Alexandra, the RA, said she wouldn't be liable. "But what happened? Why don't they fix it?" Jen asked. Alexandra just shrugged and said, "Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal." Jen didn't worry and put the damages out of her mind. But some heaviness was growing on her. The longer she lived in Unit 21B, it wasn't amazing, but it was worth it to have her independence. A few weeks after she moved in, Jen noticed something peculiar. Every day, around 20 minutes after she got home in the evening, no matter what time it was, someone would knock on the door. Whenever she opened it, there was no one waiting on the other side. Jen was beginning to worry about the heavy feeling and wonder if this place was haunted. But it seemed a stretch. There were no rumors of hauntings in this building. She brushed it off. One weekend, Jen went with some friends overnight to Fort Lauderdale. Her brother, who was working in Miami at the time, spent the night at Unit 21B, and he shared her suspicions. On Saturday morning, something woke him up early. He realized that the fan had turned off, on, and then off again. He broke into a cold sweat, but he didn't know why he felt creeped out. Maybe it was because there were no other signs of electrical disturbance in the room. 5 minutes later, the fan turned on again. The digital clock was plugged into the same socket and was fine. The fan or the socket must be messed up, he thought, but somehow he didn't think so. On Saturday, he switched the plugs of the fan and the clock. On Sunday morning, the fan did the same thing, but the clock was fine. So it wasn't the socket. Jen came back Sunday night, and her brother wished her luck as he left in a hurry. Jen didn't really want to stay at home, so she met up with a friend for dinner. It was raining hard that night, so they waited for it to lighten up before going home. When she arrived at her unit later in the evening, things took a terrifying turn. Jen was in the shower when she felt as if someone was watching her. Every time she turned her head back, she was afraid she'd be greeted by the sight of something only nightmares could conjure. She avoided any circumstance that meant closing her eyes for more than 3 seconds. Once she finished showering, she proceeded to dry the rest of her body, her long hair dripping behind her back. Everything else felt colder and heavier, and she knew it wasn't because of the rain. Jen hung her towel by the bathroom's drying rack, and that's when she heard it. A deep voice, as if breathing heavily down the nape of her neck, exhaled a deep and chilling sigh. It was almost a whisper, but undeniable. Before she could react, her wet and heavy hair from her back was flicked to the front of her face. She ran straight to her bed, texted her brother what happened, and blasted loud music to distract herself from fear. It was calm again for a while. However, at around 3 a.m., Jen woke to the spine-chilling sounds of metal, walls, and doors banging near her unit's door. After that night, the regular knocking at night and the banging on the walls from 3 to 4 a.m. happened every day. The entity would sometimes toy with her, opening and closing her door at random times of the day. She would hear a click and find that her door was ajar when she was certain that she had closed and locked it. Later on, the entity would shake her bed, waking her up. Eventually, the whole 3rd floor would hear the noise too. It came to a point where Jen needed a friend to accompany her to her room so that she could shower in peace. One afternoon, while her friend waited outside the bathroom door, all of a sudden, the bottles on her shower rack began to shake uncontrollably. After that incident, she resorted to bathing by the bathroom sink for weeks. I was so afraid to use my own bathroom, like something was constantly waiting to pounce. It was torture, so invasive, Jen told me. As if the poor student hadn't experienced enough, Jen's phone began to malfunction, sometimes randomly calling friends at the dead of night FaceTiming with her contacts. Only Jen wasn't on the other end of the call. To comfort Jen, her brother would sometimes sleep at her place. He said that sometimes the lights would repeatedly flicker on and off, despite having no maintenance issues in the building. When Jen told her grandma what was happening, she gave Jen a holy statue for safety. Jen placed it on her dresser. When a couple of girlfriends stayed over at her place, the statue plummeted to the ground and the head broke off. This happened at 3 a.m. After 4 months of this, Jen could no longer ignore the spirit and decided she'd had enough. She sought help from her grandma, who gave her a Saint Benedict medallion that was blessed for protection, and a special kind of salt that she then poured around her studio. A few minutes later, when she turned away, the pure white salt turned black. Then, at around 3 a.m., Jen woke with a cold shiver, with her eyes half open. Through her peripheral vision, a tall, dark figure stood at the foot of her bed, still as a rock quiet, breathing, watching her sleep. Tired as she was because of the finals week stress, she dozed off anyway, as if her subconscious was protecting her from the fright. After that encounter, Jen no longer had any unusual experiences in Unit 21B. In 2016, she was finally able to move to a different floor and unit in the same building, sharing with a really nice girl, me, and everything was back to normal. Or so I thought. At the end, she told me why she had been reluctant to tell me the story. The entity had a habit of following her friends and family, and anyone else she tells the story to. It bothered her brother at his apartment in Miami, and the friends she went to Fort Lauderdale with, who lived in another dorm building. So this entity is not a ghost attached to a place. It's attached to its story. I can only hope it doesn't bother me or you.